everybody, it's Sarah Rose and Chris Rush.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for coming. Today we're going to be talking about saving teachers' time and some of our own experiences about how we've saved time as teachers and things that we've learned from you as well. The reason, as you may know, that we are talking about this topic so much is because we've just released the report from the survey that we ran in the Facebook group, I think about a month ago now, where we were really asking you about how much time you're spending on lesson preparation outside of the classroom. And that's really got us to thinking just about all the ways that we can spend, that we can save more time in our classrooms and out of the classrooms. So if you don't know me, I'm Sarah Rose. I'm one of the moderators of the Off to Class Facebook group, and this is Chris Rush. Do you want to introduce yourself, Chris?
Yeah, my name is Chris Rush. I've been teaching ESL online since 2013, and then in 2017 I joined the Off to Class team. So since then, my job has been to help ESL teachers connect with more students.
Excellent, thank you. And as we go along, please post any questions or comments and we'll try to get back to those as well. We'll be monitoring those to make sure we can respond. So let's get started. Chris, do you want to take the lead?
I sure do, yeah. So I'll kind of share the first point. And it follows up on what Sarah has just been saying. By the way, in case anyone has any difficulty seeing or hearing, I think Sarah is watching the comments. I don't see them, right? So Sarah will tell me if there's any issues that come up. So talking about teacher time. Now, this is something that doesn't get talked about enough. It seems like there's just this expectation that teachers do extra work. And it's almost like teaching is seen as like this noble profession or like this helping profession, which somehow in the real world means teachers don't really need to be paid. They're expected to do it for the love of their profession, not for the income. And many teachers do it for the love, and that's great. But what happens is there gets to be this kind of mentality that's baked in that says a teacher's time isn't valuable. And that in the real world means you are paid for the time that you teach, but you're not spent for the time that you spend planning, for the time that you spend grading, for the time that you spend helping students outside of the classroom. And so a lot of teachers, if they add up all of the time they spend doing administration or all things that are very much part of their job, but not being paid for, then if they actually calculate their hourly rate, boy, it seems like really sad and frustrating because you actually say, boy, I'm making maybe even less than minimum wage in some cases. And this is true whether you are independent online ESL. This is true whether you're K-12, especially K-12. Gosh, they might have the strongest reputation for like this overworked sort of admin stuff. So there's this burden. So when we talk about teacher time, I'm going to zoom out really far, okay? And I'm going to like even get away from teaching for just a minute. So in order for others to value your time, you have to value your own time first, okay? So to even step outside of teaching, this is an issue about boundaries in general, right? So sometimes, you might see, like if you're reading like an article about even psychology, you might be familiar with the principle of we train other people how to treat us by showing when we respond to somebody, I can signal to another person what is an acceptable way to treat me or an unacceptable way to treat me based on how I respond, okay? Mm-hmm. And then this leads to all kinds of difficult interpersonal relationships. But for this, we're talking about teacher time. So the kind of important thing to take away from that concept is if you don't value your own time, your students will not value your time. And what does that actually mean? That means having clear boundaries on when a student is learning with you, having clear boundaries and expectations that the student understands of what your role is as the teacher, what you are able to do as the teacher and what you are not able to do as the teacher. So this comes in the form of work outside the classroom. So sometimes students may say, as a request, hey, can you look at this paper that I wrote, whether it's for school or this report that I have to submit for work. A lot of teachers will say, of course I will. Why? Because we're teachers and we care and we want our students to succeed. So whether it's a college application or an email that they need to write to their boss, so many teachers, myself included, our tendency is to say, of course I will. And when we do that, there's a little shift because the implication is that I'm going to do this extra for you. I'm going to do it extra for you, but because I care. And it's good to care. But we do have to be careful because we get into this gray area where we are setting the expectations that I'm here to do extra for you. And even though most students are well-meaning when it comes to that, there are a few where the requests will never stop. So the question is, how do you value your own time in the face of this? And one of the things that you can do, just as an example for myself, because my background is private ESL online, that's Sarah's background too. So both of us have this kind of experience, is to say something like, I'll be happy to grade it for you. Here's what I'll do. I'll take a look at it, send it to me. We'll see how long I'll see how long it takes me to look at it and to give the corrections that I need. And we'll take that time just off of the next lesson. Is that okay with you? That is a way. So just to make it super practical, that is a way to give the student what they're asking for, but also to still respect your own time. And the nice thing about saying, is that okay with you, is you don't have to be a jerk about it. You don't have to say, no, my time is precious. And you're paying me for time inside the classroom. I'm definitely not suggesting anything like that. But you're giving the student the power to make an adult decision, to say, oh, is this something I really want? Is this something valuable? And then the student can say, yes, this is very valuable to me. It's worth losing 20 or 30 minutes off of my next lesson. Or the student has the power to say, I think the Grammarly extension might be good enough, and I really want to preserve our one-on-one time. And when you do that, you do it from a place of equality with the student, never from this place of like, I feel bad. So that's kind of the opposite of the like, no, I won't do that. The thing is like, I'm really sorry to tell you no, but in that way, you preserve this kind of really healthy boundary and expectations with students. So another subpoint of valuing your own time, and this is especially applicable to private ESL, is when you think about the price that you charge for lessons. The price that you charge for lessons is a reflection of how valuable your time is to you. And there's a message that gets sent to all potential students who will see, like, this is how much this teacher values their own time. And it just does tend to happen. So if you're in a situation where you're able to charge your own rates teaching privately, it happens again and again where the teachers who tend to charge the less have students who know, they see, okay, this teacher's time is worth less, and I'm going to ask them to do more and more. So they're charging $5 an hour or whatever low rate, and I want to get every cent of value out of these lessons that I'm paying for. So I'm going to ask the teacher to do all these extra things and be upset if the teacher ever says no and makes any attempt to value their own time. Because when you think about like an hourly rate, there's two ways that you can kind of increase it. Number one, you can charge more money, which is difficult, but an easier way to increase your rate of pay is to decrease the time you spend working and doing admin. You can't decrease the time you spend teaching, but if you can cut your outside of class time, let's say in half, that's like getting a huge raise. So there's this interplay of prices, value, and time. The last point I want to make about valuing your time is a cancellation policy, right? And again, this is something that's more applicable to something on the more private side. My cancellation policy, which I got from another teacher a long time ago, it used to be so tricky because I used to like have a cancellation policy that was like, I'll wait 15 minutes in the lesson. And if the student doesn't come in the 15 minutes, then I'm going to end the lesson with no rescheduling. And that sounds like it might be okay, like in theory. But what I found is that I would wait around and then like I would end the lesson after the 15 minutes. And then like 5 minutes later, the student would email me saying, I couldn't make it today. Can we reschedule? And then it made me feel like so bad. Like, oh, I don't want to tell you no. But I've spent all this time, waiting, and I didn't make other plans because I had planned. So now something to be clear with, and this is the other part, it's important to set these expectations clearly at the beginning. I tell the student, listen, you are buying an hour of my time, right? This hour is yours. You can reschedule it up to 8 hours in advance, but if not, then it becomes locked on the schedule, and that 8 hours you can be flexible with. But I say, I will wait for that hour. That's an hour that you have reserved. So it doesn't matter if you're running late. You could run 15 minutes late. I'll be there. You could run 50 minutes late of a 60-minute lesson, and we'll talk for 10 minutes. But the class will not run over, and it will not be rescheduled. And I don't know about you, but I always have something else productive that I could be doing on the computer. So if the student's not there, I can open the video conference up, wait for the student, and start doing something else. I can still be productive. I don't have to feel bad that now I can't do something else with my time that I might have otherwise done, because I know that this is a lesson that I'm getting paid for. So those are, I'm trying to give a couple of small examples of how the big picture thing of valuing your own time that's how you can communicate valuing your own time to students. Because if you don't value your own time, then you shouldn't be surprised when students don't value it either.
Yeah, I actually think my cancellation policy is probably stricter. I think I give 24 hours. I ask for 24 hours notice to reschedule because of time zone difference. If you say 8, then they can message you at like 2 a.m. and you don't get
totally
it. So,
true.
Yeah.
I totally get that. And I changed mine based on lesson time of day. So there was a while that I had a student that I was teaching at 10 p.m. my time. That's a hard hour. And I have to I don't know about you, but when I have a lesson at 10 p.m., it's kind of looms over my head all day long.
Yeah.
and it wasn't my favorite, but the student was super consistent, and that was the time he needed. He would take 3 lessons a week at 10 p.m.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of 10 p.m. teaching, not an ideal time for me. But with him, I had to make it a little different because my evening had to be planned, my whole evening, right? And whether I was going to, do something social or whatever had to be. So you need to find something that works for you. I am all for a stricter cancellation policy because it just sends that more clear message that you as the teacher, you value your time.
Yeah, and I think if they're insisting on a time that's quite inconvenient for you, it's kind of like the Uber surge model, where you can adjust your conditions for something where it is a more valuable time to you because it's usually when you're not working. And then you can insist on something stricter for that.
I think the challenge comes when the teachers are less experienced or newer to online teaching. Because when I first started, it's like it can be a little bit of a luxury to be able to say, stricter cancellation policy at this time or higher price at this time, because a lot of teachers are saying, I'm just looking for my first student, and they're way more willing to extend themselves. So it is like this balance, because when I first started teaching, I was willing to get up at 3 a.m. for my very first students. I remember that. I was not in a position where I wanted to turn anyone down. And so if somebody booked 3 a.m, I got up, and again, this was a long time ago, but I remember what that was like. And I was the person who would have been super, super flexible. So you might just need to decide what that boundary needs to be for you. If you're just starting off, you might be in a position to say, listen, I want to get credibility. I want to get reviews, and to do that, I'm really, I'm forced to push this balance slider here. but just know that that's okay, but that it doesn't have to be there forever. Once you get that experience, once you get some reviews, the problem is not that you have to move the slider over here. The problem is that you get conditioned to think that it needs to stay here forever, that you always need to get up at 3 in the morning, that you always need to have a super flexible cancellation policy. Don't be afraid to start moving that slider back to a place of sanity for yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's good, especially when you start to consider whether the things you're doing are a strategic decision because you've just started and you're trying to be more flexible, or you're trying to achieve the goals of getting more reviews, etc. But you know where you want to be. So you know where you want your cancellation policy to be. And even communicating to a student, this isn't my cancellation policy, but I'm going to make an exception because I've just started using this marketing site, or you're one of my first students in this platform. So I'd really appreciate a review. They usually do it if you ask them for it.
Yeah, that is really helpful. And it just comes back to the theme about being clear with the student, right? This clarity of why everyone loves it when an exception is made for them. But communicating what the expectations are at the beginning with clarity, and then you can choose to do things like that. And students are usually very grateful for it.
Yeah. And I think it comes across as more professional. Sometimes when you start, you might feel a bit nervous about setting boundaries like that. But actually, I think students, they recognize, it's like you say, if you value it, if you show how much you value each hour, then they do respond to that. We've got a comment that says, I do 24 hours cancellation policy, but I also add that if I ever have to cancel a class, then I will make up the class and then give them a free class. It's parents like that it goes both ways. But I've taught 15 years and I've never had to give a free class. So I guess it's quite a good little something that you can say, which makes it seem really good for the student, but they never actually claim it.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that I could say I've never had to cancel a class, but that is not true. That's not true for me. No. I don't know, like things happen sometimes, and I've had to be the person who sends an email to a student, a certain number of hours beforehand that says, hey, student, I'm sorry, but I can't make the class. It always depends on the relationship and the rapport. You never want to do that in the second lesson with someone. You want to make sure that you've got many lessons in the bank and really confirmed your reliability to them. So that's a fine policy, but it may not be for everyone. Like that's not something that I would want to implement for myself because I just don't have that perfect record. But I think it's great. Like if you have that superb record and you really pride yourself professionally on saying, I always show up. I will always show up, and in the rare event that I cancel, you get a free class. That's great. I just wouldn't want someone to feel like, for it to be kind of something that then discourages them because they're teaching classes that they're not getting paid for. Yeah.
When I've had to cancel classes like for sickness, I've only had once a student question that I was able to cancel it within the 24-hour period, whereas they would be charged via my policy. And I had to say, well, that's because if I cancel it, you don't get charged. Right. If I cancel the lesson, I don't charge you for the lesson I can't teach. It's only if you cancel it that late notice. And then they understood.
Sure.
Okay. So kind of following on what you've said about valuing the time, I think it leads on to thinking about how much time are you really spending outside of teaching on other activities. One thing that I think is helpful is to consider your working day, including those hours outside of your outside of your teaching time. So sometimes, especially when I started teaching, I would set my teaching hours from say 10 till 6 or longer. But if you get fully booked for that entire time, you'll be working on your weekends to try and fill out all of the preparation and extra work that we do. So you need to include in your working hours time to prep. And that might be, maybe I used to do it on a Friday afternoon, so that on a Friday you're quite tired a little bit. By the end of the week, you can't be on as much for the teaching. So that's when I'd spend my time preparing for the following week and making sure I knew what my schedule would be. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about some ways that whatever you're doing in those additional times, so managing your students, the payments, the lesson options and planning what lessons, how you can try and reduce that admin time, and reduce the time that you're spending working outside of class. And in this live video, I've put some links into the description that maybe people can look at afterwards if it will be helpful. One of the things that I did that I put a link for is having a kind of instant study plan that I make for new students. So I never had to prepare for a trial lesson because I already had the whole structure for every type of trial lesson. I went through the same thing. And then when I was doing the trial lesson, I would be typing as they were talking, making basically the proposal for them that I send after the lesson. And then there's no additional work because you're doing it within the lesson time.
Yes.
The trial lesson time. So I put the link for that in the description. And then that kind of leads on to once somebody becomes a student, so that's a trial lesson, then you put them into, well, I put them into a spreadsheet, which is a tracker, just my own Excel spreadsheet, so that I can track all the lessons that they've done and what they want to follow, what they want to do in the next lessons if they mention something in class. And that means that when I do come to my weekly planning session, I have a complete overview of everybody and I don't have to try to fail to remember what we did in class. So I put a link to that as well. And those are 2 other videos that we've done in the group. So hopefully those are helpful if people haven't seen them already, or if they've lost the link is back. And then the final thing, which is a video that you did, Chris, which was about using the teacher tools. So the teacher tools is something on after class that we've offered, which is, again, it's a spreadsheet, but it covers all of the lessons that are on after class. And they're all categorized, so it's really easy to navigate. That can be very good to create a course quickly, a course plan. But the other feature on those teaching tools that we haven't talked about so much is that they have vocabulary lists. And this is very useful when you want to quickly make activities or recycle vocabulary, or even make like spot tests or games for the lesson. You can find the vocabulary that's featured in the lessons, and after class lessons always recycle vocabulary, for example, throughout units in the curriculum. And as that's on a spreadsheet, it means you can easily copy and paste that into different programs if you're using a flashcard program, for example. And if you're doing that if you have several students at the same level, then you can make a set of flashcards or a certain game using just one list of vocabulary to cover you for the month. So that's quite good. So I put the link for the teaching tools as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to respond to, Sarah, was like thinking about this initial burst of motivation that a lot of teachers feel. I remember myself when I was a new teacher. It was like, not only was I willing to go above and beyond for my first students, but it was like I wanted like my first handful of students. It was like I was, the excitement was tremendously high, and I was like, I'll do anything for you. You're my first student. I'm gonna make a total custom plan for you, and spending a lot of time doing these things and making these things. Now that's fine, and that's wonderful excitement and motivation, but you've just got to keep your sustainability in mind, because what feels great for your first few students, 6 months later, if things go well and you've got 20 students, those types of above and beyond practices may be unsustainable. So what I keyed in on what you said, Sarah, was when you're typing during the trial lesson and you're kind of making that because if it takes 20 minutes, that's a lot of time. And if you do a few trial lessons and you're not making it during, that time adds up. And I had that experience strongly when I was working for an online language school. When I was working for an online language school, part of the admin that teachers were just expected to do after each class was we had to type up a report for each student, give a real example of an error they made, model the correction. And sometimes the classes would have 8 or 10 people in them.
Wow.
So, and I hope the administrative burden is a little bit less now, because like I said, this was a while ago. But I found, like, after every class, I was like, okay, time to sit on my computer and type up my lesson report. And my goodness, if I had 3 or 4 of them in a row, that became quite burdensome. So I had to make this progression between, like, I had to get super efficient. I had to learn how to take notes during the lesson, and then sort of like be preparing this little feedback document during the lesson. And having things you can reuse is super important. So I had, speaking about this specific example, I had like a template that I could just kind of fill in the blanks for what the error the student made. I could just fill that in the blank and then model the correct. And then I would have like different little feedback, cookie cutter feedback responses that I could sort of just paste in and make it super fast. And so when you know, that was like an early version, but when you have spreadsheets that you use over and over again, that's something that can be super useful, right? When you don't have to make a vocabulary list from scratch for each student. Wow, sounds exciting for your first student, but for your 100th student, you're going to be burned out long before then. So the teaching tools are a great example where here's the vocabulary list. You can cut them and paste them into something very simple, or make your own template that you make once and use again and again, or just share it directly as it is without adding anything to it. It's a perfectly functional vocabulary list. So all of that stuff is super important and relevant. I see that we have a couple of comments that one I want to address. Approaches for marking homework. Most of the off-to-class homework can be easily marked in a few minutes, which is fine with me. However, there are some free text questions, and a couple of my students like to write an entire novel. In those cases, I started reviewing the homework in class. How about you? That's absolutely what I do. For more advanced learners, there are more elaborate sort of writing exercises in the homework assignments. And it's like, write a paragraph on this, and what do you think, and why, and back it up with examples, because that's what more advanced learners need. And when they take it seriously, when I had a student once who was like, I really want to improve my writing. So every single lesson, I gave her a homework assignment from the speaking lessons. And the speaking lessons have those kind of in-depth writing examples at the end. And she was very serious about her language learning. So she wrote a lot. And that's exactly what she and I did. I didn't grade it between classes, but we would spend the first 15, sometimes 20 or 30, depending, minutes of the lesson just going over the homework. But then again, this was her decision to make as the learner. And so I could check in with her and say, hey, listen, how do you feel like lessons are going? And that would be her opportunity to say, we're losing speaking practice because we're spending too much time going over homework. At that point, it's very easy to say, okay, fine. Instead of spending 20 minutes, we'll just set a timer for 10 minutes and we'll go over as much of the homework as we can in 10 minutes. And that way you're going to get 50 minutes of more direct practice without losing this writing. So it's all about communicating with the student, getting their feedback and seeing what is working for them and what isn't, and making adjustments. But you do not need to take on the burden of saying, guess I have to spend 30 minutes extra each week going over this student's long writing text.
Yeah. And I think Saskia in the group commented today about one of the challenges being perfectionism. And with writing homework, one of my not mistakes, but one of the things I used to do was mark every single mistake that was in, or error that was in the writing homework, which takes way longer. It doesn't just take longer, it's also less useful for the student because it's too much information.
Sure.
So by limiting the amount of time you spend on it, you also avoid that problem of really overwhelming them with detail.
Yeah, you're going to give them the most important things that they need to focus on.
Yeah. And if I were you going through that writing homework in the session, if anything came up, any errors, then that's when I put into my spreadsheet with all my students on, oh, we made some errors with articles, note that down so that next week I know that we're going to do a lesson on articles and I don't have to think about it.
That's a very good point. Yeah. And I'm sure I'm less organized than you when taking like notes on the students. And I think that's great. I think that's really important to have some kind of simple tracking in place to make sure that you're addressing those types of student needs. And I think really simplicity is the key, because there are lots of elaborate tools that you can find online, some that are free, that can be, and some of those can be really helpful, but some are going to just be a little bit maybe like overkill and just cause you to spend more time working in a system when all you really need is a super simple way, like as in a spreadsheet or a list. This is the date, this was the student, this is, you know, 2 sentences maybe of what we talked about, and this is something, oh, they struggled with articles in the homework assignments, so I can look at this at a glance and know that this is something we need for next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we mentioned the study plan, and Chris, you were talking about setting the expectations at the beginning. I think something really nice to do when you're onboarding a new student or advertising your lessons is list out to them exactly what's included in the lesson price. If your lesson price includes homework and marking the homework and sending them the marking of the homework before the lesson, if you do all those things, you can list those as each lesson includes 45 minutes of teaching, a 30-minute homework task that I then mark, and you're really explaining to them exactly what they're getting for the cost of each lesson, and kind of reminding them that there is activities that happen for the teacher outside of class as well, from the beginning.
Yeah, and those are things that also can be adjusted over time. Like if once you start teaching for a little while, you might realize I'm promising a little too much. You know, I might be overextending myself by promising the student, you know, an hour of lessons, 30 minutes of homework correction, whatever the case may be. It's important for teachers to just be able to monitor that and say, is this working for me? Because if it's not working for you and you keep going, you're going to get to a point where you say, I can't do this anymore. You get frustrated, you quit. And then, you know, then it doesn't work. So it is important to keep an eye on how you feel about it. And if you start to feel resentful, or if it starts to feel burdensome, that might be a sign to say, when I list out these expectations, which is a great idea, because it's all about this clear communication. This is a theme that I'm hitting again and again. Then you can alter that, you know, starting from this student on, you know, instead of 30 minutes, it's going to be 10 minutes, right? Or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a place where you can start to reclaim some of that for your own sanity.
Yeah, and remembering why you started teaching online, which for many teachers that we hear is, I wanted it because it was more flexible, because I would have more time. So then if you lose all that time by doing these extra tasks, you lose the benefit of the reason that you decided to do this.
That's right.
Somebody said they've been using the study plan for a while. Fantastic. Feel free to edit it if it's not right for you. So you mentioned that you can get third-party tools there if you want to, and which is obviously true. I was reflecting this morning about how if you need to pay for a third-party tool, it's really worth picking the tool that does the task that you hate the most, because that's where you'll really feel the benefit from it. So if it is, for example, for me, the financial side of things, I just couldn't do it. Receiving the payments was very complicated, especially when I started, which is why I chose to go on italki, which I think you'll talk about a bit more, Chris. And then the deciding what to teach. Although planning a lesson wasn't so bad, just planning what to teach was always difficult for me. And that's why having a curriculum was like a huge bonus. So if you pick the things that you really cannot do, or you don't want to do, to use third-party tools. I know that Maria spoke the other week about how she started using Tutorbird to do one of those things.
Sure.
And we were also talking about like Google Classroom and My School Books are some other options for these kind of additional administration tools if you find that your spreadsheets just aren't cracking it for the amount of students that you have. Or maybe if you're teaching group lessons where you probably need something a bit more thorough.
Yeah, I think it's just important to like keep it as simple as you can for as long as you can before you start. But sometimes those things are necessary. And that's the very reason Off to Class exists. It's the very reason Off to Class exists, because lesson planning is time consuming. look, some people love it. Some people take immense joy in this pedagogical aspect of, I'm going to collect this resource from this place, and I'm going to source a text from here, and then I'm going to write little questions to check their understanding. And then, and for some people, like that's part of like who they are as a teacher. And that's great. But I think for even for people who love it, it's time consuming. And so it's time consuming, I think, for everyone, right? For everyone, it's time consuming. But for most of us, not only is it time consuming, we don't get joy out of it. For me, custom making a 60-minute lesson plan, boy, that's not what excites me as a teacher. What excites me as a teacher is seeing my student learn something, right? For me, the joy is in the interaction. So because for me, the rewarding part is in the interaction, generally speaking, I prefer to spend as little time as possible on doing anything but that, right? For me, all the time that I have doing administration, doing planning, all of that for me is time that I'm trying to compress as much as possible and seek to be efficient with as much as possible. So some of these tools are really helpful, but this is why Off to Class exists. Off to Class exists because lesson planning is hard and it takes a long time, and you can still be creative in how you use them for the people that really want to get into that. So what I would kind of want to pivot, and you kind of made that nice seg for me, Sarah, and just talking about finding the tools that made it easier for you as an italki teacher. So for anyone who doesn't know, most people probably know, italki is a teaching marketplace, and it's kind of a teaching marketplace sort of bridges the gap between I work for a language school. The language school provides me curriculum and students and pays me a rate that I'm probably not happy with. And over here we have, I am an online business owner who is completely independent, and I source my own students and I do all my marketing, and I don't rely on any school or any company, and I'm my own business. So the problem is that there's a very big gap between these two things. I'm getting my hands as close as I can to the edges of my frame to sort of make this explicit, right? And starting an online ESL business is not any easier than starting any sort of other business. So a lot of teachers think, well, this should be easy because I know how to teach. It should be easy for me to start an online ESL business. The problem is not the teaching. The problem is in all the other associated things of starting a business. How are you going to collect payments? How are you going to schedule? How am I going to get a website, a marketing strategy? And this becomes very quickly overwhelming. So one of the things I've been talking about recently is why I recommend this middle bridge, which is the marketplace, the italki, the Verbling, the Preply, the many other kind of second tier marketplaces out there, because they allow you to host a profile on the website. And what happens is they handle logistics. They handle the advertising to make sure students are seeing your profile. They have the scheduling application through them and the payment application through them. So all you have to do is you make a profile, and then it's like magic. You make a profile, students see it, they book lessons with you, you just show up and teach. And then you don't have to say to the student, hey, can you pay me? Like, the lesson is paid for before they start because it's all done through the platform. And you can have this confidence knowing that as long as you were there and having a lesson, you're being paid for that lesson. So I've talked to hundreds of these teachers and asked them why they're doing this. Why are you on this marketplace where you have to pay a commission on your lessons instead of being fully independent? And there were two reasons. The number one most important reason, and this is what surprised me because I didn't expect this to be number one, but the number one reason most teachers choose a marketplace instead of going the route of full independence is logistics. Meaning they don't have to try to set up a booking calendar and manage scheduling conflicts and confirm lesson times. They don't have to worry about a cancellation policy even, because the cancellation policy is handled by the platform. And that way, as teachers, we don't want to be the bad guy. So that way the teacher doesn't ever have to be the bad guy and say, sorry, student, shame on you. You didn't cancel with enough notice, and therefore I'm not going to refund. Because if you're just fully independent, you have to say that to the student. And,
Yes.
and you have to say to the student, I'm not giving you a refund because you broke my policy.
Yeah.
That's not easy for a lot of people, especially teachers who generally speaking, we want to make our students happy. But when you're working on a platform, on a marketplace, the student can kind of step behind the marketplace and say, hey, listen, student, these aren't my rules. These are the marketplace's rules. Marketplace says this is the cancellation policy, you agreed. And then as the teacher, you can like even be on the student side. Sorry, right?
Yeah.
Gosh.
There's nothing I can do.
Yeah. And that gives teachers comfort. And it's totally understandable because it's not easy to be the bad guy. And so the number one reason that teachers choose these marketplaces is those logistics are handled for you. You don't have to do the booking. You don't have to do the payment. You don't have to do the cancellation. And most teachers are so happy, and me too, to pay 15% of whatever you charge to handle that for you, because that's, they charge 15. Some are a little different than that, a little higher. So that's the number one reason teachers use marketplaces. The number two reason, this is what I thought would be number one, is getting the students, because this is like the big question, right? If you want to get into online teaching, well, where the heck do I get students? And what do? I send emails, or do I make social media? How does all this work? Do students just find me, or are there students on the internet, Googling? How do I get on the front page of Google? This is a huge thing. And most teachers who wish to be independent, the number one reason that they're not able to be independent is because they just can't get enough students to make it work.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And this was my number one reason. My number one reason for being perfectly happy on a marketplace was because I didn't have to worry about students. I didn't have to spend, so we're talking about saving time. I didn't have to spend time making a website. I didn't have to spend time writing like some kind of email newsletter, making social media posts, talking about advertising or another student acquisition strategy, or all these things that are necessary to start a business. For me, this was the period of time in my life. I was in an RV or a caravan, for those of you not in the United States. We're traveling around the United States, and it was a lot of time driving. I didn't have time to be, running a business, which is what that would have taken. I just had a profile on italki. And so having the profile on italki meant I would be driving to my next destination and my phone would beep and I've got a new trial lesson from a student that I have not met before. Fantastic. I go to sleep one night, I wake up the next morning, I've got a new trial lesson. Now, there's a lot of work there, setting up the profile that's attractive, doing the trial lesson in such a way that the student wants you to teach them. But the reason that I always recommend go to these marketplaces is because it's an easier way to get to be an online teacher, get to have income, and not have to say, I'm going to do all of this time investment of starting a business.
And start getting the income as quickly as possible, instead of having to invest maybe a month or more in simply setting up the website and things.
A month would be on, I would say a month is on the very low end. If someone is able to be like, oh, I just started an online business with a brand new website and I got my first students in a month, I would say, oh my gosh, a month.
Yeah.
That's amazingly short. Good for you. And most of us don't have a month to see if something works, especially if we don't have the skills that are necessary to do that well. And this conversation goes in so many directions, but these marketplaces allow you the opportunity to get some of the benefits of full independence, while you can, if this is something you're interested in, you can develop those skills on the side. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the main reason that I ended up, I started on Preply and then on italki when I was teaching online as a beginner, was because of the logistics, to the point where sometimes people would contact me independently through people I know here in Spain, and I think, oh no, like if I take on this student, I won't have the cancellation policy in place. Of course, by that point, you've kind of set up and become more confident using italki, and you can just replicate the same
Sure.
the same policies to your other students, but it does make it much easier.
Absolutely, and it's that same principle, right? If you can use the marketplace and get, as you gain comfort with other skills, until you get to a place where you do have the confidence to, as I said, be the bad guy and tell the student, hey, listen, I'm sorry, we need the email by this time. It wasn't in at this time. This lesson can't be rescheduled.
Here's quite a good comment. I don't think the cancellation or rescheduling policy is really obvious on italki. I had to deal with a number of flaky people. I added the policy to my profile and each class description to be really clear, and I haven't had issues since. Yeah, to be fair, I did similar. So in the study plan that I send to new students, I include the cancellation policy so that they've seen that. And then I say, oh, are you happy to book now after you've seen the cancellation policy? And even though my cancellation policy said exactly the same thing as the italki policy and linked to the italki policy because I was teaching through italki, somehow having it as a separate, branded with my own branding document feels like you can say, oh, yeah, well, I sent you the document. Here's the link again. And doing those things initially saves time later. Not just saves time in having to run around the houses, but it saves time in agonizing about how you're going to have this conversation with somebody, because you already know how you're going to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I think a good like my response to that is that for a new student, nothing is obvious.
Yes,
this student may be a veteran of learning online. You may be the student's first online teacher. This student may have no appreciation of how the system works, and how a student views things like timeliness may vary depending on culture and background. Mm-hmm. And so kind of a theme that I keep returning to is it's so important to communicate this clearly in the beginning. And I think I maybe should have emphasized that when I was talking about like the cancellation policy, you cannot just assume that the student is going to know what it is. It is so necessary, just like you said, Sarah, when the beginning of the relationship with the student, you want to set out clearly, I'm going to do this and this and this. And this applies to all types of teachers, whether you're a private teacher, whether you're a public teacher, you teach college, you teach kids, doesn't matter. It's so important at the beginning of any relationship, right? We can even zoom this way beyond teaching and teacher and student. It's so important at the beginning of a relationship so that both parties or all parties know what the expectations are, right? Like this is what's happening, and this and this and this. I mean, like it applies to everything. It applies to families. It applies to romantic relationships. We have to be clear on, we want to know what the other person is expecting of us and what we're expecting of them. Your student wants to know what to expect from you as the teacher and what you as the teacher expect from them. And as a student, it's not their job to set out those expectations. It's your job as the teacher. As the teacher, you are the one to say, hello, student, welcome to my lessons. This is what we're going to do. This is how we do things here. This is what is okay. This is what I'm going to give you. And this is the things that are not going to work, right? We don't do less than 4 hour, less than 8 hour, less than 24 hour cancellation policies, whatever you're going to do. And always, is this okay with you? Always, it's permission based. It's treating your student as an equal, right? Even though it's the teacher's job to set the expectations, it's not your job to be their boss. It's your job to say, hey, listen, this is the parameters are if you want to work with me. Is this something you're cool with? And if you are, then that's awesome. And if not, that's cool too. There's I'm sure you can find plenty of teachers. Not that you'd ever say that like that to a student, but that you approach the student as an equal.
Yeah, I think it is something that goes beyond teaching, and maybe people who are coming in from a non-teaching background, if they've freelanced in other careers, or from a business background, already have some of this knowledge. But if you come from a teaching background where it is a bit people-pleasing and working over time, then these are the things you have to learn if you start working independently. But they're good lessons to learn, I think.
And for me, it all points back to the very first thing, which is if you don't value your time, other people won't value your time. And that's true on its own, right? That doesn't apply to teaching only. If you don't value your time, other people won't value your time. That applies for you in whatever job you may be doing now or you might have had in the past, about your coworkers, about your boss, about your customers, whoever they are. If you don't respect your time, you can't expect others to.
Absolutely. Somebody said here that Preply has no cancellation policy, so they created their own when they started. I wonder if that's still true for Preply, if they leave that down to the teachers to set their expectations. And Maria, who gave that great live about Tutorbird, said, I send a mini contract to my students explaining what we agreed during our free strategy session, which is the equivalent of what I'm talking about with the trial.
Yeah.
Specifying my cancellation policy. And I think that is a great place to put that, as it's the agreement point. It's when you're agreeing to go forwards. This is my proposal. If we're all agreed, let's book our 20 session package. And they practically do have one now. Okay.
And it's such a little thing to it seems like it's not a big deal to show this to a student in advance, but just simply showing it to the student and having the student say, yeah, okay, that's powerful because they've agreed to it. And the student knows in themselves, well, they've agreed to it, so that if you have to be the bad guy later, you're going to be much, much, much less likely to get any sort of pushback because the student has already agreed to it and they understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, well, as we said at the beginning, the reason that we're talking about this so much is because we've just published the report from the survey. And the purpose of the survey and then the report, the white paper that came from it, was to look at whether or not Afterclass is achieving its mission. And the mission of Afterclass is to save teachers' time, particularly on lesson preparation. And even though, you know, we are teachers, we have teaching experience, I was reviewing the survey data. And even with my experience, I still found it eye-watering to see the amount of time that people spend on lesson preparation. A large number of people who were spending over 90 minutes or over an hour preparing a single lesson, a typical lesson. And you know it's true when you think about your own experiences too, but when you really see it written down, then you think, wow, like that is a huge investment of the vast majority unpaid time.
Yeah.
And so it was really exciting because the impact that was people reported in the survey was the huge reduction, going from sometimes 90 minutes per lesson down to 5 minutes of lesson preparation. Nearly well over 90% of people who replied said that Afterclass reduced the amount of time that they spend. And with Afterclass, 1 in 4 teachers spend 5 minutes preparing a lesson, and I am one of those, I think, which is a huge transformation. For sure, like from how much I was spending before. So we were just struck and excited to see that Afterclass is definitely achieving that goal, and it's something we hope to keep checking, to keep hearing from you, and it's something that we've obviously heard anecdotally in the group, but to be able to see it in figures is really exciting as well. So put the link of the report. I've put 2 links. There's a cheat sheet which just gives like the summary of the concepts in it that you can read, just 2 pages. But if you are interested in the longer one, there's a link to that too. And Chris wrote a blog about that. And I think the longer report could also be really helpful if you, I don't know, if you're working for another organization who might be interested in buying it too, or you want to send it to colleagues or friends or something who don't understand how you can teach so many classes each week because they're spending so much time on their lesson preparation. So those links are in, and we'd be really interested to hear your feedback. I don't know if anybody who finds that is surprised, or maybe you think it just sounds like what you'd expect from your own experiences. I've got a couple more comments. Did you have any that I want to read out? Chris, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's it.
So Maria said, I believe Afterclass has an Excel sheet with lessons recommended for kids, and she is absolutely right. It's in the resources section, but I'll add that in comments when we finish the video, so you can easily find which lessons are suitable. And we also have some kind of tips about how to adjust after class for younger learners. We do have teachers using it with younger learners independently, as well as in organisations.
Yeah,
in high schools and middle schools. Great. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming, and please feel free to keep sharing any of your reflections on if you always valued your time, or if that's something that you've had to learn along the way, if your students value your time enough, and if they do, how you managed to make them do that. And thanks, Chris, and see you soon.
absolutely. Thanks so much, Sarah. All right, see everyone soon.
Bye.